All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on wherever you are joining us from today. I'm delighted to have you with us as we take a look at visual tools in MAXQDA. This is going to be a pretty straightforward introduction to some of these tools. So I'm going to give you a demonstration on how you can set up your visualizations. Given that it's a little bit that it's aimed towards maybe newer users or intermediate users, I'm also going to try and give you some insights on those adjustments of the application that you can do to get your visualizations just the way you want them. I am going to build out some of the conceptual pieces as well in sort of setting up your software, setting up your document system, setting up your code system to make it sort of easier to generate these visualizations, but also to give you the widest range of possibility in terms of the visualizations that you can generate. You may be using these for different purposes. You may be doing some exploratory analysis with these, or you may be actually creating some polished products to incorporate into one of your deliverables. So I think setting up your project file in a way that you can sort of maximize this output and sort of use it for a number of purposes is going to be helpful for actually leveraging the full potential of these features. So before we get started, I wanted to give you just a little bit of background for myself today. Again, my name is Joel Drevlo. I will be your trainer today. So I am a certified MAXQDA trainer. I'm also a MAXQDA cooperation partner for North America. So Verbi, the company that makes MAXQDA, is based out of Berlin, Germany. So when stuff happens here in North America at educational or academic conferences or professional conferences, if you're there, you might see me standing at a MAXQDA booth. If you do, come up and say hi. Tell me about the research or the work that you're doing. It's always fun to talk with our users. You'll also see me in a lot of these webinars and doing other training with MAXQDA. A little bit just on my background, primarily in program evaluation. So I worked with a large university-based outreach organization delivering educational programming. And we used MAXQDA to evaluate our qualitative data, interviews, focus groups, survey data, a lot of the material that we were putting out, the education materials and other things like that. I have a big interest in teamwork in MAXQDA, so if you're conducting team-based analysis, I'd love to hear from you and sort of maybe some of the tools or tricks that you apply to your specific work. And in my current role now, I do a lot of qualitative data analysis software training. So working with brand new researchers or experienced researchers that are just starting to incorporate MAXQDA or the software into their work. I am based out of the Boston area. So if you would like to get into touch with me, my email address is listed here, joel.drevlo@iqdas.com. Love to hear from you, hear your thoughts on the session today, or if you have any need for training coming up. A little bit of a pitch for some upcoming training. We're going to be, along with another colleague at Verbi, we're going to be providing a MAXQDA weekend crash course. This is going to be a comprehensive course starting all the way at importing data into a project file and organizing your data, coding your data, doing some teamwork sharing, so how to create exchange files, how to create visualizations and summaries. There's going to be over 8 hours of instructional time in this over 2 days, a Friday and a Saturday, and you're going to earn a official MAXQDA certificate. So if you're interested in that, or if you know somebody who would be, you can share this information. These slides should be provided to you in the handout section of the webinar today, so you can download those there. It's just a PDF, and you can find all the links necessary for today. All right, so a final bit of housekeeping here. This is being recorded, so I'm going to try and move through this as fast as I can to cover as much as I can, but you'll be able to have that recording in the future if you want to rewatch anything, or if you want to share this with any of your colleagues, if you're doing something in a team. As far as questions go, I'm going to leave some time at the end, so there is a questions box. If something pops up that you want to know more about or you're confused about, feel free to drop a question there. Or if you have questions about any feature in MAXQDA, I will do my best to answer that as well. So drop those into the question box as you have them. If you need to actually talk, if your question is a little more complex, I can also open up mics. You can raise your hand at the end of the session, and you can chat with me, and we can try and get your question taken care of. So as far as housekeeping, that should take care of it. Let's go ahead and jump into the session. I want to lay out just sort of our course for today, the things that we're going to talk about so you can get an idea of what you're going to learn today. First of all, we're going to talk about setting up for visualizations. This is some of that conceptual piece. We're going to look at how can you organize your document system in order to make setting up these visualizations a little more straightforward. We're going to look at how can you set up your code system so that you can create a number of different types of visualizations. A lot of this is going to be sort of like cross tabulations, or we're looking at sort of tables where we've got rows and columns. So we want to think about all the ways that we can incorporate the different combinations of the data that we have and the work that we've done on that data. I'm going to actually generate a bunch of these visualizations, so I'll walk through all the steps to show you how you create them. You'll get to see what they actually look like and how you might be able to incorporate them into your work. I'm also going to work with some of the customization. So we'll talk about some of the things that you can turn on and off to make sure that the visualizations look the way that you want them to. We'll talk about exporting as well. So there's a couple of ways that you can get these things out of MAXQDA. And we'll go through two in particular, the clipboard and the QTT. So the QTT is the questions, themes, and theories workspace. It's a new feature in MAXQDA 2022. And then at the end, I'll hold some time for questions, and hopefully you'll have some questions about either today's topic or something else with your research or with MAXQDA. So let's go ahead and let's talk about when we set up for our visualizations and some of the considerations that we want to take into account. So first of all, as we start to plan these things out, you'll note that with a lot of these visualizations, you are going to need to have some work done. So you're going to need to have obviously these analytical codes in order to make to generate these visualizations. Without them, there's really not any information that you can actually use to create these. So you'll need to have some work done. You can't do these just with raw data in your project file. You'll need to have some of that coding done. And so as you start to get ready for these visualizations, what are some things that you want to take into account? Well, let's start first with your code structure. So by the way, I'm working from the example project file. And if you come to Open Project, Example Projects, it's the English work-life balance. So if you want to try and follow along today, you can open that project file, or if you want to try and generate some of these yourself after the webinar, that's the project file you'd want to use. So let's take a look at our code system that we have in this project file. And you'll note that there's a number of analytical codes that we've already assigned to our data. So we have top-level codes like work-life balance, which is for the future work situation. If we open these up, we have a number of subcodes underneath these that then define those parent level codes. You'll also notice that we have some more what I would term sort of structural codes. So for example, we have just a purely negative positive under satisfaction. So what this is going to allow you to do, having a combination of these analytical codes and these structural codes, is you'll be able to sort of break these things out by fairly understandable categories. There's a number of structural codes that you could use. This one being negative positive, you could use something like if you were looking at, for example, certain individuals that were relevant to the person that you're coding. So these could be relationships, mother, father, son, daughter, friend, coworker, boss. Any of these things will allow you to sort of take any kind of thematic or analytical codes that you've applied and to break them out into certain categories. You could also break these into things like happy, sad, or any kind of structural combination you could that was relevant to the research that you're doing. In our particular project, we have with the satisfaction code, we have a negative and a positive. So there's a number of ways that you can look at this. You can almost think of these as like a variable value more than, there's not a whole lot of depth in terms of the meaning of that code, but it allows you to get some kind of nice categorization. So that's one thing that you'll want to take into account in terms of how you generate this visualization. And I'll show you as we get into some of these visual tools how you can actually use that piece. So in addition to structuring your code system with these specific codes that you can use to generate these visualizations, you'll also want to think about the organization of your document system. And Probably the easiest way to think about that is with the use of folders and subfolders. So, excuse me, if I look at my interview folder here, I can open this up and you see that I have, I've broken these out between two different cities from Berlin and Hamburg. And so this could be just very basic structural things. I could just look at a combination between the two cities, or there could be some kind of specific sort of difference between the two locations that I'm taking into account. This could be some kind of socioeconomic difference. This could be a degree of religiosity. This could be any number of different things between the two locations. And in this case, it's a geographic location, but you could structure these in a number of different ways depending on the demographic information that you collect or sort of the structural information that you have available to you from the data that you're using. You can also compare these across data types. So if I wanted to look, for example, at my interviews versus my focus groups, I could compare those two folders. So there's a lot of different ways that you can draw comparisons. So you'll want to think about that as you create the organization in your project file. And always remember that this does not have to happen at the very beginning of your analysis. You can always create these folders and subfolders later on in your project. You can create document sets. There's always ways to do this after the fact. So if something becomes apparent to you and there's some kind of comparison that you want to make between two different groups in your data, you can always create that. You can duplicate things as well. So it's very customizable. So don't think that this is something that you have to have planned out from the very beginning. You'll probably find as you dig into this analysis, if you're newer to this type of research, that it's a little bit messy in terms of how things appear to you or how things grow in your project file. So don't be afraid to experiment with these things as you get going. All right. The next thing that we want to talk about, so we've talked about planning our coding structure, we've talked about organizing, we want to talk about clearly defining our code system. These comparisons that we draw in terms of what the visualizations look like, unless we have clear definitions of what our codes actually mean, whether that's an analytical code or a structural code, it's going to be very squishy in terms of what we're actually seeing with our visualization. So you'll want to make sure that you have very clear definitions listed here. So if I open this up, for example, in my work-life balance, typical workday, I've got a really nice memo. If I double click and open my memo here, you'll see that I have a code definition. I have some examples, some actual text from the code, the location in Salim's interview. I have some comments here as well. I have all of these pieces of information that allow me to really understand what type of comparison I'm actually making as I start to generate these visualizations. So these code memos are going to be very important as you start to build this stuff up. I don't know why I'm getting the spinning wheel here. So documenting these things is going to be very important in terms of how you are able to build out the actual significance of any visualization that you generate. I may need to shut down my MAXQDA here. Apologies for this. Let me open up my project file again. Okay, so here we are. Let's scroll back down. So we talked about making sure that we have these clear definitions. And then the last thing is this idea of making notes about your visualizations. One thing that I've had a lot of personal experience with is creating visualizations or creating some kind of summary or something in MAXQDA and not having the documentation to actually remember what I had done with that or the significance of that visualization in the past or what my parameters were in terms of how I set this thing up. So it's going to be really helpful. It's going to be in your best interest to make sure that you include those notes. And one way that you can really sort of MAXQDA will help you to do this is by using QTT. So let me just show you real quickly what that looks like. If you come to the analysis tab and you come over here, questions, themes, and theories, this is available regardless of what subscription you have to MAXQDA. You'll see that what we have here in this example is I have a subject, a specific subject that I'm working on, and a specific research question that I have defined. All of my visualizations then are included here, visuals and statistics. And as soon as I export any kind of visualization to this, I'm asked to take insights. And so this will allow me to capture any of those notes, anything that's meaningful that appeared as I generated this visualization. So it's just you'll find that a lot of this stuff is not necessarily the tool itself. The tool is very easy to apply. It's how do you actually incorporate this into some kind of a workflow where you include all of this information that you've created. And so I think the QTT is a nice way for you to not just generate a visualization, but to actually include any notes. And this is exactly like a memo in MAXQDA, so it's limitless in terms of how much text you want to apply here. You can insert tables, you can insert you can copy paste anything in here, lots of formatting options as well. And then this exports as a nice Word document as well, a nice collated Word document when you get finished with anything that you want here. There's specific information, videos and stuff like that on the website. I have some webinars available as well on QTT if you want to learn more about that. Or if you have specific questions, you can always reach out after the session today. All right, so that is an end to my rants in terms of how you can set these things up. And none of this these are not things that you have to do. There's all kinds of ways that you can approach this. These are just some things based on the experience that I've had doing my own research and then working with others and some of the challenges that they've encountered as they've done this. So again, this is not the way, it's a way. You need to find some type of path that works for you and the work that you do. So let's take a look then at these actual visualizations. How do we generate them and sort of how do we customize what they look like? So we're going to be up here in the visual tools bar at the top of your ribbon. You can open this up and we're going to kind of work our way left to right. We're going to start with the code matrix browser. If you hover over any of these options, you'll get a nice tooltip here. So this is going to say shows the distribution of code frequencies across documents, document groups, document sets, and focus group speakers. So we're working at the document or document group level here in terms of how we're viewing the distribution of codes and the frequency. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to show you just kind of a straightforward example to help you sort of get this conceptual piece here. What we're going to look at, we already saw that in my interview group, I have two folders. I have a folder for Berlin and I have a folder for Hamburg. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a comparison of a code broken down or broken out by these two different cities. So what we're going to do is we're going to activate both of these groups. So these groups, and you'll notice that we're going to need to term these second level groups, right? This indentation implies that this is a second level. And we're going to grab one of our codes. Let's go ahead and do this work-life balance code for today. And so we can check our dashboard down here. We have 10 documents and we have 12 codes. And what this is going to allow us to do is to generate the code matrix browser that we want to look at. And so as a matrix, this is going to give us tables and rows. When this option window appears, one thing I want to point out is this I box down here. If you're ever experimenting with new features in MAXQDA and you're a little unsure about what something is, this will take you directly to the documentation in the manual that will tell you exactly what this is and what it does. So feel free to experiment and then use this documentation feature to get any information that you need. So the first thing we need to do is we need to choose our columns, and we're going to do document groups. Now remember I said that was a second level group. Document group you can think of just as a folder. That's just the specific terminology that MAXQDA uses. And so we want second level, right? Because we are indented here, we're on the second level. And then I'm going to use just my activated documents and my activated codes. Now you could use anything, you could use your entire system if you wanted to. If you have a ton of documents and a ton of codes, that's going to be difficult to interpret. It's just too much information. So we're going to select what we have here. And you can also use weight filters if you have that worked into your project as well. So if we click OK here, you'll see that we get our visualization is generated. We have our code matrix. And so we have at the top level, we have our columns here, which in this case is the folder name. So I have a column for Berlin and a column for Hamburg. And then in my rows, I have all of the different codes that I was working with. So in terms of what we can do to customize the outlook of this, let's take a look at the options that we have available here. The first one here is to display codes with hierarchy. You can see from that little visualization there, that basically is just going to show this indentation. So if I unclick this, you'll see that I get everything neatly aligned. If I'm only working with one code, this doesn't really matter. If I'm working with several codes, this can be helpful because it's going to show me where my parent code starts and where my subcodes begin. So you'll have to depend. If we look here in my code system, you'll see that my work-life balance top level code has 0 coded segments. So it's really just an organizational thing. All of these subcodes are what are doing the actual definition, or the defining in this case. So you could remove that hierarchy, not a big deal. The next options are basically going to resize the length of your column names. So if I go to this first option, you'll see I have no names. Here I have a shortened name or abbreviated, and here I have the full text. So if you're using a lot of columns, this can be nice if you want to sort of shrink the size of your table down. I usually will use the full names. It's easier for me to make comparisons. The next one is, again, this is really more of an aesthetic. So we can change our nodes to squares or circles. We can also just do numbers if that's more convenient for you. And you can also do just a heat map. So a color-coded density plot in this case. So the darker or the brighter the red in this case, the more coded segments, or the higher the frequency of coded segments in whatever category we have, in this case, the document group. I like the circles, so we'll just stay with that. You can see that this is a density plot, so the size of your icon here is commensurate to the frequency or the number of coded segments in whatever grouping that you've chosen, in this case, a document group. We have some options to change how the calculation is done. So in this case, all coded segments. So it's evaluating all coded segments in these 10 documents that I have activated, 10 again showing in our dashboard down here. I can also count this but based on the column. I can also count this based on the row. So if I wanted to see just within the document group itself, or if I wanted to see on the level of the code, I could specify that depending on sort of what my purpose is with this visualization. I can also count these only once per document. So if you were basically looking at just sort of the existence of this, you can remove any duplication. So for example, in this long interview transcript, someone may mention friends and family more than once. If I only wanted to see if it existed in the document, I could specify this way. Binarize is going to give you kind of an on-off option, and then this sum value is going to give you a sum column for the rows as well as the columns. So I can see the summation of everything, right? So I have this 121 total here, and then I could also look at the rows or the column wise, depending on what information that you wanted. You can also sort these in different ways. If you decided that you wanted to add any codes as you're doing this, if you're doing any kind of sort of investigation here where you're looking at things, you can activate and deactivate different codes, and you can use this refresh option. In terms of getting any of this information out, you can use these options over here. So send to QTT worksheet. So if I send this to my demo worksheet, you'll get a noise. I heard it in my headphones. I don't know if you heard that over the webinar or not, but if I close this out, if I go to analysis, questions, themes, and theories, and you'll see that in my visuals and statistics, I now, if I scroll down right here, I have this this visualization, and I can include any insights that I have. So that's a nice way to make sure that you can get your visualization out, and you can take some nice notes. All right, so let's go back to that visual tool. Okay, so that kind of takes us through in terms of the different comparisons that you can make. One thing I also want to point out while we're here, all of the visualizations are interactive. So if I were to, let me actually go to home, open up my retrieve segments window. If I double click here, you'll see, if I were to hover over this, you'll see that there are 16 coded segments. Right, and you'll see there are now 16 coded segments in my retrieve segments window. So these are hyperlinked. So if I were to click in this particular bubble, it'll bring up 21, it'll bring up these. So if I wanted to actually do some investigation on these things based on how things are breaking out, I could do that. So now in my retrieve segments window, I can use my smart coding tool. I can do some auto coding. I can generate some word clouds or export. There's all kinds of options that I can do. So it's not just a static visualization. This does actually allow you to do some investigation once you have some sort of basic coding done. In addition to that, you'll note that there's the interactive quote matrix. So if I click into one of these codes, note that there's 0 segments in here. That's why it's blank. If I click this, you'll see that I actually now get my qualitative data. So I get my actual text. So it's a really nice way in terms of, you know, if you're using a mixed methods approach, I can jump back and forth between more of this quantitative side of things, where I have a count, code counts or frequencies, and I have the actual text that people use. This can also be a way to sort of check maybe some of the validity of your coding to make sure that you're staying on track and in terms of the application of your codes and the definitions, all that stuff. So let's go through some of the other visualizations that you can generate here. Let's show you again with the Code Matrix browser. Let's show a different comparison that we can make. So this time we're going to use the documents, and we're going to use the same documents that we looked at, and we'll use the work-life balance. And we will do just the documents. We'll do activated and activated codes. And now you'll see across the top, I have the individual interviews. So whereas before I had a comparison across the two cities, now I have a comparison across the individual interviewees. And so I can see that Salim mentions his friends and family really more than anybody else. So I can start to draw some comparisons between, you know, what maybe is important to particular interviewees or particular groups. However, I've done that grouping in my document system. So let's take a look now at a different comparison we can make. So we broke out our codes by documents. Now let's actually see a comparison across codes. So it displays the co-occurrence of two codes in a segment or document. And to give you sort of the conceptual piece here, I'm going to start with this analytical code, and I'm going to break it out by this structural code of just satisfaction. So let's set that up. So first of all, for the rows, I know that I want my analytical codes in the rows. So I'm just going to use my, we'll just go with the activated codes. And then for the columns, I'm going to select some codes. I'm going to do negative and positive, right? So I have those two selected, and then I have the activated codes for my rows. Type of analysis is going to allow you to set your parameters. So intersection of codes is going to be very close, right? They actually occur in the same segment of text. Proximity of codes is going to be basically, I can set a distance. So if I were to look at one of these interviews, 21 is a paragraph, 22 is a paragraph. So if I set my proximity as one paragraph apart, it would have to occur within that range. And I can specify however I want to do that. Again, depending on the type of data that you're working with, or just in the same document, which is going to be casting a very wide net. So it depends on how your data is structured and sort of what it is you're trying to see, you're trying to visualize. I want to keep my net kind of small, so I'm going to do this intersection, and I like the way that this is set up only for activated documents so that I have just these 10 documents. All right, and this did not load properly for me. Let's try this again. I need to select those two. There we go. So what we have now is I have in my columns negative and positive, and then I have in my rows the code system, the code that I've chosen, my analytical code. So I can see that instances of friends and family, 18 coded segments, so they were mentioned in a negative context. Again, the definitions of what it means when friends and family is coded and what it means when negative or positive is coded is going to be crucial to this. At this point, if I don't have clear definitions of this, this is super squishy. I don't know what this means or what the significance of this is. So you do really need to put in that, that work to actually define these code systems so that they're applied consistently and in a systematic process, and so that when you actually generate these visualizations, there's actually some valid meaning you can glean. In terms of the options at the top, they're all going to be pretty much the same. You'll note that we have an option up here to actually switch over to a code map, which is what I'm going to show you next. So let me just show you that through this icon. If I click over here, is it not going to load for me? I'll have to set it up manually. But essentially we get now a breakout between those different, those codes based on that structural code. We could also do this as a comparison across analytical codes. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to generate this code relations browser again, and I'm just going to do activated codes on both levels. I'll keep my type of analysis at the same degree. And when I click OK, you'll see now that I have more columns because it's essentially the same on the rows and the columns. So I'm seeing where do these analytical categories overlap. So I can see that, for example, typical workday is mentioned in the context of free time and self-care quite frequently. Free time and self-care, again, so we see we have this is going to be replicated, right? Because we have the same column in the same row. So do note that you will have some duplication here because we have the same code in the rows, or excuse me, the same code in the columns and the same code in the rows. So there's a lot of comparisons, different comparisons that you can draw here. Again, the options are going to be the same in terms of how you can customize the view and the look of this. I've got my code map option actually highlighted now. So some of these are going to be ignored because there is no overlap. There is nothing to be shared in these particular pieces. So if I click OK, you'll see that this is very much the same. So I'm gonna try and draw these both into the same window. So if I look at this, if I hover over this, my tooltip is going to give me the size of the dot is going to be commensurate with the number of coded segments, right? So if I were to look at free time and self-care and typical workday, let's come down over here to our code system. 21 segments, 21 coded segments, and 16. So you can see that the size is pretty close. The size of the thickness of the bar connecting them is going to be representative of the number of instances where they overlap, right? So this has 9 and this only has 1. So that's going to be one way to show the relationship a little bit clearer. And then the distance is also going to be indicative of how frequently those codes co-occur. So essentially you're getting the same information, right? We're looking at sort of an overlap of how these things are positioned. It's just a different way to conceptualize this. So if your brain prefers to view things sort of spatially, this might be a better resource for you. If you would prefer just sort of the numbers laid out in a grid format, you might be happier with the code relations browser. You'll note that there are some different customizations here in terms of how you can display things. So code size, so we have here turned on code size reflects, so that's the actual dot here. Reflects frequency. We can also turn these grid lines on and off. We can change our fonts. We have the ability to change sort of how the color is calculated here. So it can be chosen by the actual location on the map, or we can choose some different parameters here. And you can get more specific information about this in the manual that will tell you exactly how this is calculated. But map position is usually a common way to use that. And then we can also change how we show the relationship between these different codes. So this is basically just another way to visualize that same concept. So the last visualization that I'm going to show today is the word cloud. And this one's a little bit different than what I've shown in that you really can use the word cloud early on in your analysis as more of a exploratory feature. It's going to be looking at really word frequency in whatever, if you're choosing documents or if you're choosing specific sections of documents. So you don't need to necessarily have as much of that coding work done. So it can be a nice place to start if you're sort of exploring what there is in your data. So let me show you what that looks like. So to get started, I'm going to deactivate these codes. This is a really good practice to get into as well, this deactivate everything. And to always keep an eye on your dashboard to make sure that you're selecting things properly as you are generating really anything in MAXQDA. And so we'll leave these on. If I open up my word cloud, it says I can drop these in. I can insert activated elements. I'll just do that. So I have my 10 interviews that are inserted in here. If I click OK, I'll get my word cloud generated. In terms of customization here, you can choose to lematize, which means basically looking at different word endings. So family, families. We can do a stop list, which I've applied here. So if I open this up, you'll see essentially what this is prepositions, articles, things like that I would not want included. It's not really significant how many times someone says the. What's also really nice about this is that these words, again, like you saw in the other visualizations, these are hyperlinked. So if I were to right click on this, I could actually auto code this. I could add this to my stop list if it wasn't something I was interested in, or I could do the Word Explorer, which is a really cool tool as well. This will give you some more context. So it'll show you how frequent it appears in documents, how many hits, which documents, which groups, sets, what kind of documents it's most frequent in, where it appears in your memo, so you can get a lot more context about how things shake out across your whole project file. It's a pretty cool tool, the Word Explorer. And so that allows you to do some more of that exploratory stuff. So I want to start with some keyword analysis, right? If I want to start digging into some of my data, I could auto code this, right? I could generate an auto code for time, and then I could circle back through any of those instances, and I could say, well, what does it actually mean when someone references time in their project file? So it's a little bit of a different functionality in terms of how you do this. You can use it at the end of your project after you've done your coding. You could use it at the beginning to do exploratory stuff. If I wanted to sort of narrow my parameters for this, I can open up my retrieve segments windows, and let's turn on work-life balance. So now I have 121 coded segments. I can generate my word cloud from here. So rather than including everything in my project file, or in my documents that I had selected, I'm only including the segments that were coded under the work-life balance code. So again, just narrowing my parameters. So you can see that the functionality kind of varies. If I want to just do some exploratory stuff towards the beginning, I can just use the documents. If I want to generate some more fine-tuned things, I can use codes that I've actually applied to my data. So it's a little bit customizable. So you'll see that you'll have to get a sense of how much work you've done in your project and sort of how you can start to leverage some of these features. All right, so that takes us up. I'm right at about 2:36 here, so we've got about 8-9 minutes left in the session. I want to stop here and pause for any questions that folks might have about either today's session or about anything that they've sort of encountered in MAXQDA so far. So if you do have any questions, feel free to drop those into the questions box. I'm also taking a look at the attendance here. If you do want to raise your hand, if you wanted to actually ask a question, I can unmute you, and you can do that as well. So like I said, we've got about 7-8 minutes left now. So if you do have any questions, please drop those in the box. If you don't have any questions and you need to get on with your afternoon, feel free to pop out of the session. I appreciate your attendance today. Thanks for joining. And here we do have a question. Is there an option to make graphs with bars, for example? Yes, there is. The easiest way to do that is via the subcode statistics. So for example, right here with work-life balance, I have many subcodes. If I were to right-click this and I were to open my subcode statistics, I can just pull in my work-life balance. This will give me a table of the number of instances, and then I can also generate a bar graph from this. There's a number of ways that you can set this up in terms of how this gets generated, but that would be the easiest way. A lot of times bar charts and things like that are going to be generated from your variables. So you can look at document variable statistics, for example. So I could pull in a specific thing, like I could look at the number of children across my individuals. So I have 0, 1, 2, and 3. I could also generate visualizations from this. So that's one way to leverage those. You can change the styles if you want to change the orientation or make it a pie chart, which I guess I wouldn't recommend, but that would be one way to make those. How do you export these visualizations to other tools if possible? Sure, let me show you that. So if I come back to my visual tools, let's make a code matrix browser. So if I wanted to export this, I can go right here, copy current display as an image to clipboard, right? So this would copy it to my clipboard. If I were to then, let me create a new Word document. I want to make sure that this is loading here. And I could then paste this in here. Let me try that again. I can then paste that right into my Word document. So this is then generated right into any Word document that I'm working with if I'm creating some kind of report or something like that. So that would be one way. If I had, in my analysis tab, if I had questions, themes, and theory, I can export this worksheet. We'll just stick it on my desktop. Okay, and essentially what this will do then is actually open that. Let's see if I can find it. My desktop is a little bit cluttered. So if I generate this from QTT, you'll see I get this So this is actually has a table of contents in it. And if I come to my visuals and statistics, I have code matrix browsers and all the things that I've generated from my particular worksheet. So that's one way to do it as well, if you didn't want to copy paste each piece. How to transfer the picture visualizations to other document. Okay, I think we just covered that one. You can use the camera icon in the visual tools. Let's open that again. You can use this camera icon. You can also just send this right out as an Excel table if you wanted to do some more customization in Excel. Is there a way to make APA format tables? That is a good question. That's one I cannot answer for you, unfortunately. I think there is some information about how to create documentation like that in the manual, but off the top of my head, I don't know. Sorry, I cannot answer that question for you. Wow, QTT is really amazing. Yes, it is. It's a really cool tool. I think, you know, one of the most challenging things that I've encountered in my own research and working with other folks is making that transition from analysis to deliverable. And I think QTT gives you a really nice space to collect all that information and to create, again, a lot of this is about building out a workflow or a work process. So how do you actually do this in a systematic way? You know, being able to do things consistently across all of your data or across different projects is really what allows you any kind of way to compare this in terms of how you've applied this to different types of data. So yeah, I would definitely check out QTT. There's some cool YouTube videos on this. I've done some webinars on it as well. So there's some cool information out there on MAXQDA to check it out. All right, let me check out I don't see any more questions. Let me see if anybody's got their hand raised. I don't see anybody with their hand up. Again, if you want to ask your question, you can stick your hand up and I can unmute you. All right, looks like somebody has their hands up. You should be unmuted if you want to go ahead and talk.
Hi.
Yep, I hear you.
Yep, I hear you. My name is Shlomit. I was just exploring different types of ways to use it for my research, which are mainly interviews. And I found, I don't know why you today focus on the visual tools, but there are a lot of visual tools also in the analyze system.